Okay, so we're holding on Mem Testament days in the bottom. The last words on the page. Okay, we thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day, and the schus of our learning, we shall have the base of English immediately, learning for Shlema for everyone that needs. Father and Naftali ben Bela and Yaakov ben Pega, and is there someone else? Okay, whoever needs a Shlema, learning in that schus. So we're in this incredible sugya regarding if one thing is learned with one of the 13 ways that the Torah is learned, and then you try to learn what was learned to something else, so it becomes like a grandson, like what's learned is now being taught. The question is, can you do that? Can you learn something that was only learned through one of these ways to teach another way? We're basically using hekesh. That's a juxtaposition. Is that one of the 13 ways? I don't know. And then we're using Gzeir Shava. Is that the first one? Gzeir Shava? No, Kal V'chomer. The first one is Kal V'chomer. Then we're using Gzeir Shava. Then we're using Kal V'chomer. Then we're using Binyan Av. And we're trying to go. You can have 16 possibilities here, correct? Because if you have 4 things, and then each one could be in 4 ways. Is that 16? That would be, or is it 5 things? There's a Rashi over here that spelled it out. Let's see. This Rashi says there's 4 questions for each one. Each one has 4 questions. Each one has 4 questions, so it's 16. Okay. So, so far, let's see where we're holding so far. We learned that you can't do a hekesh from a hekesh, right? You can't learn one hekesh to another hekesh. And that we had 2 options. That was either Rava or Ravina. Now we just had that you can't do a hekesh and then Gzeir Shava. And now we have a question. What if it was learned with a hekesh, and now we want to learn from that? We want to learn from that using a kal v'chomer to learn to something else. We're going to go through all 16. Yeah. Some of them we're not going to have answers for. Some of them it's going to say kasha, but we're going to go through all of them. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Mid Tana, Bei Rabbi Yishmael, as it was taught in the Tana of Bei Rabbi Yishmael." And now we have to take us back to a Gemara that we had previously. It says that on Daf Mem Aleph, it says that we learned 3 halachas: es, bedam, and betfila. I don't know if you remember this. We said that if someone had a blister, it's like 10 days ago. If someone had a blister on his finger and he had to do the applications of the blood, we said that was not considered a chatzitza, right? Remember, he was allowed to use it. We had the extra word es, which is coming to include that if he had a blister on his finger, he could still dip his finger in the blood to apply the blood. Then we had bedam that told me that you need to have enough blood in there to be able to dip his finger into it. And the tefillah is that you have to dip the finger. You can't just wipe the finger on the side.
Right.
So those are the 3 halachas. Now we learned it from the Sor. We learned it from the Parkei and Mashiach, because it's es bedam and tefillah by the Parkei and Mashiach. It means if a kohen gadol does not avera. And we wanted to learn it over to the Sor of Avodah Zarah. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, we said, we learned it with a hekesh from those 2 halachas. We wanted to learn it over to the Sor of Yom Kippurim. Okay, so we're giving our answer now that you can't do this because that you can do this. You We're learning from Rabbi Shmuel that you can, yes, do this. Because he does this already from, remember, if you go back, he had this Kal V'chomer Ma, that this, which is not the same carbon, but it's the same action, it works. So for sure, if it's the same carbon, if it's the same animal,
Yeah,
for sure, it'd be the same. Remember, we had like a Kal V'chomer like that. So, okay, that was a quick Gemara. We have our answer. Now we go to the next question. Davar alamin behekesh, ma sheyilmaid bebinyanav. Sheyilamed bebinyanav. Something that was learned through a hekesh. Obviously, everything here we're talking about is kachim. What about teaching now to derive the third halacha through a binyanav? Binyanav means a precedent. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that if this was possible, then leilichtiv tzvayna b'asham. If you remember, it says the origin of the slaughtering on the north was from an oila. And when it speaks about the chatas, it says that you have to learn that you slaughter the chatas in the same place as the oila. Then we also said by the asham, you slaughter the asham in the same place as the chatas and the oila. So it says if you would be able to learn with the binyanav, then you wouldn't need to say tzafain by asham. So did we actually say tzafain by asham? So we didn't say tzafain. I thought we only learned it. Let's see. The teisei mi binyanav michatas would be able to learn it from the chatas. Because I know that the chatas is tzafain. Now, how do I know the chatas is tzafain? Because I have a hekesh. It's the hekesh is compared to
Ayla, no, something.
the ayla, right? So what I would do is I wouldn't need to say clearly by asham that it needs to be on the north. I'd be able to know it automatically. That's from a binyanav, from machatas. So the Gemara says lamai hilchsa kasvei. Why? So why did it say by the asham that it has to be on the north? Because if it didn't say it clearly, I wouldn't know it. Because I wouldn't be able to get it from the precedent. The Gemara asks, 1 second. You have a problem over here because you can ask, Teisei mi binyanav mi oila. The whole source over here is you're trying to say that once it's learned from a hekesh, from the oila to the chatas, now it can't come and teach me a third thing from the chatas to the yasham, right? From the elevation offering to the sin offering, from the sin offering to the guilt offering, and that's what you're proving, and that's why I have to say it clearly. But I have a problem over here because Teisei, we could have learned it, we could have learned it directly from a precedent from the oila. Why don't we do that? And then it's not a third generation; it's a second. It's only one generation removed. My time, why didn't we not learn straight from oila, which says that it needs to be slaughtered on the north, right? Learn it directly from there over to the asham. Because you can have a question, because you can't compare the two, because an oila is entirely burnt and an asham is not entirely burnt. So it's not considered a binyanav because it's not considered precedent, because there's too many differences. So it says if that's the case, so we can ask that the binyanav is not good because the binyanav from chatas, precedent from chatas isn't good, a good comparison, because the chatas atones for kares as opposed to the asham. Okay. So where does this leave us right now? We were asking if you can learn Bibinyanav. We sort of lost our proof. Now the Gemara says, well, now we're leaving the question that we were in, because now we're not in a Binyanav anymore. Now we're going to a what's called
No?
not a Kal V'chomer yet. When you have two things, it's called a tzad hashava. A binyanav is when you're doing a comparison from one thing to another thing, and when you do a comparison from one thing from
I think we just lost Rabbi Smith.
You coming back? RMS is Rabbi Smith.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
Sorry, it just turned off. Sorry. Yeah, it's hard to understand the chart unless you go through all the details. So now we ask this next question that okay, I get it. You can't learn one from another with the binyanav because each one has its uniqueness. However, but I should be able to learn one out of two. What are the two? The two would be Chatas and Ayla should be able to teach me that the Asham has to be on the north. Which two would I learn? It says, we're going to go through each one. It says, it shouldn't say by the Ayla, but Tesi Mechatas Asham. I learned the Ayla from the Chatas and the Asham. It says, the Gemara says, 1 second. Malahanach, Shekain Mechaprim. Those two, you wouldn't have a common factor that would include the Ayla, because those two have an atonement relative to the Ayla. They have an atonement that the Ayla doesn't have, because those two have an atonement for actual negative prohibitions. The Ayla is only an atonement for a missed opportunity, a missed positive command. So an Ayla doesn't come to atone, so we would say that those two have to be on the north, but the Ayla not. So then you have three things, right? We're thinking that if we would leave one out, we'd be able to learn it from the other two. So don't write by the Chatas, and we'll be able to learn from the Ayla and the Asham. We'd say, well, the Ayla doesn't have atonement, well, the Asham does, and you'd go back and forth and say, well, that will include the Chatas. So, but the problem is Malahanach Shekain Zacharim. Those two sacrifices, the Ayla and the Asham, are male offerings. The Chatas is a female lamb or a goat. Okay, so Gemara says, don't write it by the Asham. That's how we started. Malahanach Shekain Yashnan Betzibur Kibiyachid. Those two, an Asham and I'm not an Asham, an Ayla
and Achatas.
have community offerings that Asham
doesn't have. Cool.
So we're not able to learn. Okay. So now, how did we answer the question if it's Davar Lamed Behekesh Ma Shilman Bebinyanav? We sort of left it without an answer. We don't have an answer. Okay. Now we go to Davar Halamed Begezeira Shava. Now we have a different starting point. It starts with Gezeira Shava. Ma'ush Yalamed Behekesh. Can it teach by a hekesh, by a comparison? Amar Rav Papa says, Zeis Teiras Zevach HaShlamim Im Al Taida, says that this is the laws of the Shlamim. The pasuk continues to teach about the Thanksgiving offerings. Lamadno, this teaches us the Taida Sheba Min HaMaisa, that the carbon Taida can come from the tithe, the second tithe that was brought to Yerushalayim. You can bring the Taida from the tithe. There's always a question: are you allowed to use your tithe for different things that you have to do? So here we're learning that a korban shlamim was brought from the tithe, and if the korban shlamim is compared to the taida, so then the taida can also come from the tithe. And now we have a comparison. If the shlamim comes from meiser, and when the pasuk speaks about a shlamim, it then goes on to tell us about a taida. So it's coming to compare the two. It's coming to tell us that the taida can come from the second tithe. Shlamim gufaya minalan. How do we know that the shlamim can come from a tithe? Where do you know that from? Says the ksiv, we have a gzeir shava. Says sham. Says by the shlamim, v'zavachta shamim, v'shlamim v'chalta sham. You slaughter a shlamim, you lead it there. Sham means there. And then it says by the meiser, v'makam shivchar l'shakin shmei sham. You bring it to a place that Hashem chose to dwell, to rest His name there. It says both there. So there comes to tell me that what it says by the meiser applies to the shlamim. That you're allowed to bring the shlamim from meiser. Okay, so I have a gzeir shava. And then from the gzeir shava, which teaches me that shlamim can come from meiser, I now have a hekesh that tells me that the taida can be like the shlamim. So you see, it works. Okay, that was an easy one.
Question on the math.
Yeah.
You said 16 possibilities.
Yeah.
But if you're learning, there's 4 altogether. If you're learning 3 other ones
I know.
from each one, that's 12.
Right.
But the question is, are you
But it
stopping
actually
there,
does
or
now.
or you stopping there, or then you're taking the one you've learned and then you're trying to
Right.
learn? So it'll be 24.
No,
4
Because-
times 3 times 2.
no. What you do is you do this. Let's start with hekesh. Okay. Can a hekesh be learned with another hekesh? That we said no. Okay, so that's one. Can a hekesh be learned with itself? With the
That's why you
kavachaimer.
have 16.
And
Okay.
so it's going to be, each one has 4 questions,
I wasn't
including
counting
doubling
itself.
itself. Yeah. Okay. Davar Alamid. I'm sorry. Amalei Maseches Zavachim Daf. Our common pair that we have in the sugya. Rav Marzucha, the son of Amari, says to Ravina, Meiser Dagan, what are you telling me about Meiser Dagan? You're using Meiser Dagan to be the Gzeir Shava here, right? He's learned from Meiser, from the Meiser of the grain, to teach me the Shlamim, that it could be Meiser, to teach me that then as the Gzeir Shava includes Meiser Dagan. The problem is that is Chulin Ba'almahu, that's regular Chulin. And that wasn't our question. Are you allowed to use, can you learn one from another when it comes to Chulin? Our whole question here was, are you allowed to learn one from another when it comes to Kodshim? And here the starting point was Chulin. So that's not a good proof. Amar lei, so Ravina responds, Amar Amra. I can get this clear. Amar Amra. Let me read it in your translation. Did the one who first stated this rule also say that it applies only when Lamad Kodshim Umalamid Kodesh? So Amar Amra is like the introduction. Amar Amra, Lamad Kodesh Umalamid Kodesh. Did the one who first stated this rule also say that it applies only when both the derived case and the teaching case are Kodshim? Lamad Kodesh Umalamid Kodesh. Do we need to have the starting case and the derived case both need to be Kodesh? So, which means, as long as the case that's being learned out is Kodesh, even though the original starting one is not Kodesh, we'd have the same rule applies. So, in other words, according to, who was quoting this? According to Rav Papa, even though it starts from Meiser Sheni, that's not significant. The main thing is not the Melamed, but the Lamed. Not the one that's teaching, but the one that's learned out. Yeah, because at the end, what we learn out at the end is Kodshim. Thus the starting point doesn't matter. Amar, you have to read that together. So Amar, Lamad Kodesh, Malamid Kodesh. Do we say that it needs to be both sanctity, matters of sanctity, that we would have this concern? Even if the final thing is sanctity, then we would have the same concern. And so if it works, then it works. We're concluding here that something that was learned with the Gzeir Shava is allowed to teach with Hekesh. That's our conclusion. Davar Alamed B'Gzeir Shava Ma'oshi Alamed B'Gzeir Shava. Now it repeats itself. Yeah. Something that was learned with the Gzeir Shava can I now teach with the Gzeir Shava. Amram Bechama Tanya, stored in a brisa. We have by the Korban Taida, it says that you have to bring chalas along with it. And one of the chalas, it says Soilas Murbeches. Soilas Murbeches means that the flour needs to be boiled, similar to what you would do to a bagel, that you have to boil the dough before you bake it. So this was boiled flour mixed with oil. And Lamadno L'Revucha Shabbat Soilas. This tells us, but it says Soilas Murbeches, it tells me that it needs to be fine flour as opposed to a coarse flour. Okay, now revucha is the boiled one. So then it says chalais. It says the pasuk says chalais matzos minayin. How do you know that those need to be that the other ones that the other crackers that were brought along? How do you know that those are also fine flour? It says by this one, by these crackers, it says chalais, and it says by the boiled flour, it says also selos merekas chalais. So, it says chalais twice. So chalais by this, it says chalais by that. That's called the Gzeir Shava, a verbal analogy to tell me that the halacha that applies to the revucha, the boiled one, also applies to the other crackers. So we have a Gzeir Shava that it needs to be the fine flour. Rekikin, so other types of wafers. Minayin, how do you know that those also need to be fine flour? So it says Talmud Laimar matzis. So it says matzis by the chalis, and it says right, and it says matzis by the rekikin. So it's what I learned with the Gzeir Shava from the revucha to the chalis. I'm learning now with a different Gzeir Shava from the chalis to the rekikin because it says the word matzah. Ravina says, who was asking the question over here? Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama gave the answer. Ravina asked Rami Bar Chama, the generation gap there, but Mimai, the matzis, michalis gamar. How do you know that the Gzeir Shava matzis is actually being learned from chalis? There was another type of loaf that was just baked in the oven. In that, it says clearly that it needs to be soilas, and over there it says matzis as well. Over there it says soilas, chalis, matzis, belus, b'shem, rekika, matzis, b'shuchim, b'shem. Over there it says matzis, and then by the rekikin it also says matzis. So I'm not even using the Gzeir Shava that you were telling me about revucha to soilas, the revucha to chalis. I have a totally different Gzeir Shava where it also says the word soilas, but I'm using the word matzah to over there to the mafetaner. Elam Rava, so Rava says, okay, so we lose the support, this proof from Rami Bar Chama. It's going to give another source. It says Tanya, taught in a brisa. It says v'kirbay upirshay v'haitzi. It's talking about the Parkayin Mashiach. This is the sin that was committed by the Kayin Gadol, and he has to bring a special sacrifice, a bull offering. And the blood is placed inside the sanctuary, and the animal itself is burnt outside the temple. You take it outside the camp and you burn it there. When you burn it there, it says that you have to take the innards, the stomach. Pirshay means the stomach with the waste that's in it. And v'haitzi, and it says you have to take it outside and burn it there. Malami, this comes to teach us, shemaitziya shalim. It says that you take it out while it's still whole. You don't cut it up. When things are put on the altar, they're cut up first. Cut up into pieces, and then they're put on the altar, and there's different way it's carried up. Over here, you take the entire animal outside. You take the whole animal outside. You don't cut it up first and carrying it like, in a line. Blood was put on the altar, was on the inside in the sanctuary, the inner altar, and on the bareichas, the different sort of application of blood. But here we're learning that the actual animal is taken out intact. Yachal yisrefenu shalim, maybe outside, maybe you put the whole animal on the fire and you burn it like that, intact. So nemerkan reishu krav, it says by the parkanim sheikh, the head on the feet. And it says by the oila, it says reishu krav, that the head on the feet. Malahalan al yidin nituch, just like over there, the head that's on the feet is because they cut the head off of the animal, and then they cut the feet off of the animal and they burnt They burnt it like that, piece by piece. So if that's by the elevation offering, Afkan, they need to so to over here when they burnt the animal outside the temple, it was after it was cut up. So no, so it was only carried out whole, but it wasn't burnt whole. So how did we learn that? We learned it with the Gzeira Shava. What are we trying to get to? Can the Gzeira Shava teach me another Gzeira Shava? So Yimala Hala and Behefshit, maybe just like by the Oila, you had to skin it first. Remember, they took the hide off the elevation offering, they gave it to the Kayan. Maybe over here, Afkan, also by the Parkan of Mashiach, before it was burnt, it had to be skinned, maybe. Talmud Laimar, Kirba Yopershay. It says, Kirba Yopershay, which means that the innards and the waist. My Talmud, how does that tell me anything about if it has to be skinned or not? Amar Rav Papa says, Kshem Shepershay B'Kirba, just like the just like the waste that's inside the animal, the digested food is still inside. It's not taken out and burnt separately. It's burnt they just put the stomach on. So kach b'sarai ba'oray, just like the waste is in the stomach, so too the flesh is inside the skin. Okay, Britannia was taught in a brisa. Now we're jumping over to the animals that were sacrificed on Yom Kippur. Rebbe says, Nemerkan or Ubasu Peresh, it says by the goat of Yom Kippur, it says the skin, the flesh, and the waste was taken outside to be burnt. And we learn, and it says by the Parkain, the Mashiach, or Ubasu Peresh, the skin and the waste, the skin and the flesh and the waste. Just like over there, when it came to the Parkain and Mashiach, the sin offering of the Kohen Gadol. It had to be cut up before it was burnt. But it wasn't skinned. Afkan, so to over here by the star of Yom Kippur, it's going to be cut. The animal's going to be cut up, but it's not going to be skinned. So, which means that we have a Gzeira Shava that teaches me from the Oila to the Parkain Mashiach, and I have a Gzeira Shava that teaches me from the Parkain Mashiach over to the sacrifices of Yom Kippur, which tells me that something that was learned with the Gzeira Shava can then teach with the Gzeira Shava. Do you have an answer? Not in this case. By the Oila they can, but not by this. By the Oila they took the hide off, and by this the animals were learning that they did not take the hide off. The hide was burnt together with it.
Question. I mean, besides the fact that I don't know what's flying, but although I'm trying,
Ignoring
the
that factor.
ignoring that fact, it almost seems like all these questions, the Rebbe's that were commenting, they're the last generations of the Amoraim, and we're trying to answer them. Then we're going back to our Papa. Now we're going back to Rebbe. So it's almost like they didn't know what was flying. In other words, it's not just asking us these 4 questions. It's like they're trying to really know, hey, here we are, we're the last rabbis of the Amoraim, and do we really know?
I don't think so. Because the Ravina that we've been quoting
the first Ravina
is the first Ravina.
But he's still almost the last generation.
Okay. But apparently he's still able to speak to Rami Bar Chama and Rava.
So that's what I was wondering. Yeah. Was he speaking to them, or then they were going back and they're saying, well this is what they had said.
It says an Amar Lei. Now it could be an Amar La. No, it's Amar Lei. Amar Lei. Ravina said to him. That means Ravina's talking to Rami Bar Chama.
I had seen the first time they put it here, they put it without the bracket. The second time they put it with the bracket.
Now, sometimes
it starts with his name, and then later on, that's 58.
Right. Sometimes it's an Amar Lach, which means he could have said to you. Doesn't mean that he actually did say to you. But sometimes it's Amar Lei, and it's an abbreviation. So I don't know. Okay.
Spanning multiple.
Our next question is Davar Alamid B'Gzeira Shava Mao Shi Alamid B'Kal V'Chaimer. Once I have derived one law through a Gzeira Shava, a verbal analogy, and I use that verbal analogy to now derive with a Kal V'Chaimer. The Gemara answers like this. Listen to this. Kal v'chaimer. I'll answer you with the Kal v'chaimer. We'll learn a Kal v'chaimer that you can use a Kal v'chaimer. This is like self-referencing. Oma hekesh, when it comes to a hekesh. Remember a hekesh? You couldn't use one hekesh to teach another hekesh. She'ina malamed behekesh. You can't be taught. You can't use a hekesh, this juxtaposition comparison, to teach another one of those. Whether it's because of what Rava taught or whether it's because of what Ravina said. We had two options over there of how to learn this. But whatever the case is, we came out that you can't do it. We had two teachings on the first page of this. But nevertheless, malamed b'kal v'chaimer. But we know that a hekesh can teach a kal v'chaimer. Mida Tana Rabbi Shmuel, from Tana Rabbi Shmuel. What was that? Tana Rabbi Shmuel. That was what we said before by the S, by that what's it called? The blister on the finger. Was that the Tana Rabbi Shmuel?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, so Gzeir Shava Hamalamedes Behekesh, the Gzeir Shava, which we just learned a moment ago from Rav Papa, from the Taida. What was Rav Papa? Papa learned from the Taida, right? Says that the Taida, there was a number of Papa that we find that Sham, and we ignored the Chulin aspect. Remember that on Rav Papa? Thought maybe we're learning from Meiser that the Shlamim could be brought from Meiser. That was a Gzeir Shava, and we're going to learn from there over to Gzeir Shava Meiser Behekesh. We're linked it over to a Hekesh. Teach me that a Taida could be brought. If a Shlamim, because that was starts with a Gzeir Shava, goes to Hekesh. So if a Gzeir Shava that can be taught, that does teach with a Hekesh, like Rav Papa says, Einay din shetlam v'kal v'chaimer, for sure should be able to teach with the kal v'chaimer. So if something that's taught with a hekesh can't teach another hekesh, but a Gzeir Shava can teach another hekesh. Let's do it again. A hekesh can't teach another hekesh, but can teach a kal v'chaimer. So Gzeir Shava, which is so strong, in other words, the fact that when it's learned over to the second law, it still retains, it has its full strength that it's able to teach with a hekesh. So for sure it should be able to teach a kal v'chaimer. If a hekesh can't teach a hekesh but can do a kal v'chaimer, the Gzeir Shava, which can teach a hekesh, can for sure do a kal v'chaimer. Okay. That's how did we accept this? This kal v'chaimer is all based on that a Gzeir Shava can teach a hekesh. Now that was based on Rav Papa, that says that we're going to ignore that the first case was chulin, because we don't care about the where we're learning from. We only care about what we're learning to. Alaman de Leslie, the Rav Papa, but the one that doesn't hold it, but Rav Papa says, because he's going to say that the case that we're learning from is significant. So Ma'ikla Meimar, what's going to be your source that you can use that a Gzeir Shava can teach a kal v'chaimer? Ella, we're going to say like this, a different kal v'chaimer. Uma hekesh, which is weak. Sheina malamed behekesh. It can't teach another hekesh, right? Either either because of what Rava said or Ravina said on the first day we learned this. But nevertheless, malamed be kal v'chaimer, but it can teach a kal v'chaimer Tana Rabbi Shmuel, which was about the blister on the skin, right? So Gzeir Shava, hamalamedes Gzeir Shava that can teach another Gzeir Shava chaverta midrami bar chama, which we just learned from Rami bar chama, and others now. Gzeir Shava that can teach a Gzeir Shava from Rami bar chama, which we just learned was the or basar or peresh, right? That Gzeir Shava. So ain't din shetim a kal v'chaimer, for sure should be able to teach a kal v'chaimer. The hekesh that can't teach a hekesh, but can teach a kal v'chaimer, Gzeir Shava, which could teach a Gzeir Shava, for sure should be able to teach kal v'chaimer. We're not using the same a hekesh, but can't teach a hekesh. Oh, could teach a kal v'chaimer. So a gzer shava, which could teach a hekesh, which can't teach a hekesh, could teach a kal v'chaimer. A gzer shava, which could teach another gzer shava. I guess that's what it's saying. That the gzer shava is stronger because it can teach itself. It can double itself. The hekesh can't double itself. The gzer shava can double itself. So for sure, should be able to teach a kal v'chaimer. There's two questions that students ask. One is, first is this going to be on the test? Second question is, why do we need to know this? That's the second.
No, it's good you said that because now I just realized you have to try to remember what you're learning.
So now the next thing is davar halamed b'gzeir shava ma'o she'alamed b'binyanav. Can it teach with the precedent? So the Gemara says teku. That's our easiest Gemara. That we don't have an answer for that one. We're just going to leave that one. Okay. So we did our starting point with the hekesh. We did our starting point with the gzeir shava. And now we're going to davar halamed b'kal v'chaimer ma'o she'alamed the hekesh. What about a kal v'chaimer? Now our starting point is a kal v'chaimer. Something that's learned with a kal v'chaimer, can it then teach with the hekesh? Where it says kal v'chaimer, we'll use a kal v'chaimer to teach me if a kal v'chaimer can teach with hekesh. You see, this is becomes a little easier because once we have our first law, which was our main one, the hekesh teaching with another hekesh, so now we can already use what you see over there, and that didn't work, but this did work. So now we can use kal v'chaimers to tell me what's going to work. We couldn't do this before with the first one. So, ma gzeir shava she'eina lameda be'kesha. Something that was learned with a hekesh can't teach a gzeir shava. Either Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan taught. What was Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan taught that it doesn't need to say tzafin by the asham, and we would learn it with a hekesh. No, we would learn it with the gzeir shava.
Yeah, I think this one is the other way around, right? Something that's learned from a gzeira shava cannot learn with a hekesh.
No, it's going. I think it's going the other way. I think it's
Other way?
going the thing that was learned with a hekesh. We wanted to teach it. Did he say kachim, kachi kachim? Was that his Rabbi Yochanan's statement? Davar lam hekesh ein chesem lam hekesh. Okay. The davar lam hekesh ma shilmed b'gzeir shava. This was, we quoted Nasan ben Avtalumas. And Rabbi Yechon gave his own teaching. We said that something that was learned, it says it doesn't need to say tzafin by the asham. We will learn it with the gzeir shava. It says kachi kachim from the chatas. Why doesn't it do that? It says because davar lam hekesh ein chesem lamed b'gzeir shava. Learned with the hekesh. The chatas is learned that it needs to be on the north with a hekesh to oila. Now we're asking, so why does the asham not just be learned with the gzeir shava? Because it says kachi kachim by both. So he says that that's a proof that you can't make a gzeir shava kachi kachim over from something that was learned with the hekesh. Ma gzeir shava she'eina lameda be'akesha. I mean, something that started with the hekesh can't be now taught with the gzeir shava. I think that's what it means. Midar Rabbi Yochanan. However, but something that's learned with the gzeir shava is malamed behekesh. Midar of Papa. Papa taught that That was the Meiser. The Meiser started off with the Hekesh. Starts off with the Hekesh.
The
Then
chulin
be
and
Sham Sham, right? Can teach me over to. No, it's over there. Starts with the Gzer Shava, then teaches the Hekesh. Maybe you're right. So what's the other Rabbi Yochanan? Is there another Rabbi Yochanan here? Yes. Let's see.
Yeah, it says 49b. Rabbi Nachman.
Yeah. So 49, that would be the Rabbi Yochanan we were talking about. So that was learned with the Hekesh, and then teaches a Gzer Shava. So let's do that again. Ma Gzer Shava. We're asking now that can something that's learned with the Kal V'chomer, can it teach a Hekesh? So we say, well, a Gzer Shava cannot. Gzer Shava cannot be taught from a Hekesh. What wanted to say, Gzer Shava can't teach with a Hekesh. Oh yeah, that's right. It starts with the Gzer Shava, Sham Sham, and now we want to teach it with the Hekesh. No, the Gzer Shava, is that Rabbi Yochanan? No, that was Rav Papa, was the Sham Sham. What was Rabbi Yochanan's Gzer Shava? He was saying Davar Lamed Behekesh can't teach with the Gzer Shava.
Yeah, here in the corner it's saying, just as a halacha derived via verbal analogy, which cannot be derived from an halacha derived via juxtaposition.
So it means it's starting with the juxtaposition, and then
Sorry,
not, right? That's what it's saying. It starts
yeah,
with the, okay, so good. So it's that Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan that says that the fact that I can't say that there's a Gzer Shava Kachi Kachim to Asham, it starts with a Hekesh, and then it can't continue on with a Gzer Shava. However, nevertheless, Malamed behekesh midirav Papa, but it could teach with a hekesh, like Rav Papa said. Rav Papa taught us that something that's a what was the last thing? Rav Papa was the Meiser. That if a shlamim comes from a shlamim, we learn a shlamim starts with the Gzer Shava, and then from the Gzer Shava teaches me. Yeah. So a Gzer Shava can't be taught from a Gzer Shava can't follow a Hekesh. Gzer Shava can't follow a Hekesh, but nevertheless, Sheina Lameda beHekesha. But Malamed beHekesh, but a Gzer Shava can teach a Hekesh. You see, that's what we're doing here. It can't start with a Hekesh, but a Gzer Shava could be followed by a Hekesh. Midirav Papa. So Kal V'chomer Halamin mehekesh, a Kal V'chomer that starts with a hekesh. Midatana de Rabbi Shmuel, like Tana de Rabbi Shmuel taught that it starts with a hekesh and then teaches a Kal V'chomer over to Yom Kippur. Ein a din she alamed behekesh, for sure should be learnt. Lamed mehekesh, which is learnt, Kal V'chomer, which is learnt from a hekesh, for sure should be able to teach a hekesh. Yeah, if a Gzer Shava that can't start with Hekesh could teach Hekesh, so a Kal V'chomer that can start with Hekesh for sure should be able to teach Hekesh. That's what we're saying. Yeah. Papa, but we said this only fits according to the one that accepts her Papa, that says that it doesn't matter what it starts from, only what it finishes. The lesser the Papa, Mike, remember what are you going to say? You don't hold over a Papa. Okay, we don't have an answer. Teku. Something that starts with a kal v'chaimer, could it now teach with a gzeir shava? The Gemara says kal v'chaimer. I'll tell you kal v'chaimer. Ma gzeir shava she'ein l'mei bekesha. Gzeir shava cannot be learned from a hekesh. That's been learned from Rabbi Yechanan. Yeah, because Rabbi Yechanan said that if it could be learned with a hekesh, if you can start with a hekesh, then we should be able to have a gzeir shava from asham to chatas by saying kachi kachim, and we don't do that. So you can't start with a hekesh and then can follow with a gzeir shava, but nevertheless malamed b'gzeir shava, but a kal v'chaimer, but a gzeir shava could teach another gzeir shava. Midir Rami Bar Chama said chales matzes. Remember that? That was by the Revucha. That was Rami Bar Chama, yeah. That was Rami Bar Chama. It's a kal v'chaimer halamed behekesh, a kal v'chaimer which starts with a hekesh. Where did we learn that from? Mitan be Rabbi Shmuel, that we had from the blister on the finger. Saying a din she talamed b'gzeir shava, for sure should be able to teach with a gzeir shava. So what is this? If a gzeir shava that can't start with a hekesh can teach another gzeir shava, so a kal v'chaimer which can start with a hekesh, for sure should be able to teach another teaching gzeir shava. Okay, that's our answer. It works. Davar alamed b'kal v'chaimer, ma'oshi alamed b'kal v'chaimer. Can you learn one kal v'chaimer onto another kal v'chaimer? You got the first one with the kal v'chaimer. Now you want to continue on. The Gemara says, kal v'chaimer. It's a kal v'chaimer that it works. Ma gzeir shava she'ein l'mei bekesha midir Rabbi Yechanan. A gzeir shava that can't start with a hekesh, like Rabbi Yechanan taught the kachi kachim, right? So malamed b'kal v'chaimer, but a gzeir shava can teach a kal v'chaimer kedamran, as we said before, that a gzeir shava can teach a kal v'chaimer. So kal v'chaimer halamed mehekesh, kal v'chaimer which can start with a hekesh. So midatana b'Rabbi Shmuel, as we learned from the Tana b'Rabbi Shmuel, which was the blister on the finger, and a dinshi halamed b'kal for sure should be able to teach a kal v'chaimer. The Gemara says, V'zehu kal v'chaimer ben kal v'chaimer. The fact that a kal v'chaimer works in this is learned from a kal v'chaimer. So it's a kal v'chaimer which comes from a kal v'chaimer. Gemara asks, that's the way we're doing this. It's not a kal v'chaimer that's learned from a kal v'chaimer. It's ben b'noi shel kal v'chaimer. It's like a third generation kal v'chaimer. Because what's happening now is I have a kal v'chaimer that teaches me that a kal v'chaimer can now teach me another kal v'chaimer. So what you're getting out at the end is a third generation kal v'chaimer, because the fact that this works is a kal v'chaimer. But my what I'm learning is a kal v'chaimer. The next thing is a kal v'chaimer. Is Ella? Yeah, we're going to do a different kal v'chaimer. We're going to use a different kal v'chaimer. Ella kal v'chaimer. Ma hekesh ein alamed behekesh. We learned that a hekesh can't teach another hekesh. That was our first halacha. Imeder Rav, imeder Ravina. But malamed b'kal v'chaimer. But we know it teaches a kal v'chaimer in Tana Rabbi Shmuel that he learned over to Yom Kippur about the blister. Kal v'chaimer, when something starts with a kal v'chaimer. Halamed mehekesh. I'm sorry. A kal v'chaimer that could be learned from a hekesh. How do we know that? Tana Rabbi Shmuel, which was the blister. Yeah, it continues to a kal v'chaimer. Ein a din she alamed b'kal v'chaimer. For sure, it should be able to teach a third thing with a kal v'chaimer, but no, that's the same thing. Kal v'chaimer halamed. Oh no, Rabbi Shmuel was a hekesh that continues into a kal v'chaimer. So a kal v'chaimer, which could be learned from a hekesh, like Rabbi Shmuel says, for sure should be able to teach a kal v'chaimer. B'zel kal v'chaimer ben kal v'chaimer. This is only one step, because I'm learning it from a hekesh. Something that was learned from a hekesh can now teach a kal v'chaimer, as opposed to before we were learning something from a kal v'chaimer learning before from the rule that something that was learned with Xer Shabbat can then teach a Kal V'Chomer. And that rule itself was learned with a Kal V'Chomer. That was the problem.
There was Ben Benoim.
The rule that was learned with a Kal V'Chomer to now teach me another Kal V'Chomer. That's why that was the problem. And now I'm not using a rule that was learned with a Kal V'Chomer. Now I'm using a rule that was just learned with a Hekesh can't. A Hekesh can teach the Kal V'Chomer. That wasn't that I didn't get from a Kal V'Chomer. That I had a real source for. So that's why this is going to work, and we're going to say that a Kal V'Chomer can teach a Kal V'Chomer. Okay, let's leave it over here. Rapta Davar Alamid Kal V'Chomer, Maushi Alamid Bebinyanav. Do you see that? It's about 8 lines up.
When I was
Okay,
in school, they said you learn something, you know it either by heart or by chart. This is when I'm calling up to by chart.
This is by chart.
Okay.
So I don't know what these terms mean yet, but texture
Have a good day.
is like on the bottom.